Hi everyone, today we're going to be talking about a pretty unique opportunity where if you're a flex provider or a co-working operator, you can take over another co-working or flex site. And that usually occurs because said operator might be at the end of their tenure, so they're just giving the space back to the landlord, or that particular site is being shut down, whether that company is going into administration or part of their growth strategy is to get rid of some of their sites while they onboard new ones. And I think it's important to appreciate the opportunity here, how you can take advantage of this as an operator yourself, and how you can also help the investor or landlord in this situation. You know, my team over at JLL Flex, we've taken over a number of these sites globally. Within Australia, we've looked at a number of sites, both small and large, where we've taken over them and even retained members or taken over an existing fit out that's been abandoned a while ago. And I just wanted to share a few key considerations, some time-sensitive stuff that you really got to factor in if you are having this conversation with a landlord yourself. Because at the end of the day, if you can make it work, you can help them out. I think it lifts the perception of the co-working and the flex industry holistically. So it's good for all of us. Okay. So I'm going to start with what I like to call the compression strategy. If you've got, and this doesn't have to be to scale, I've got a diagram here of a building with 3 floors of flex, right? And let's say that's circa 4,000 square meters. When you're taking over this flex space, it doesn't necessarily mean you need to take over all of it, right? Don't get greedy because it looks really good on a spreadsheet. What we've often done is we've compressed it to even, 1 floor or 2 floors. So the 4,000 could go down to 1,000 or even 2,000 square meters, And the 1,000 you can still make work if you approach it in a flex light model, which I've covered in videos previously that you can find yourself. But realistically, you might look for the 2,000 square meters, right? Because you get really good economies of scale there. You've got enough desks and offices and even meeting rooms to make enough margin to pay your rent and then take your fee. In this situation as well, you don't just say, and this is if you really want to help the landlord, you don't just offload the 2 floors in this scenario where you've got 3 and just take the 1. There could be a scenario where you run all 3 floors and you factor that into your OPEX and you do the deal with the landlord, but then you compress all the members into that first floor, right? If this is a scenario where the site is still running and you're actively taking over it. So then they can actually take those 2 floors and then lease them. You can work with their leasing agents to put it to market when they get the demand in, so you can start generating some form of income on those floors rather than just turn them off completely, right? So landlords love to hear the compression strategy, and they're even doing it with operators that are trying to give floors back because it means that floor doesn't get shut off immediately in certain cases, and they can monetize it till they find a longer term tenant. If you're an operator, I really recommend looking at figuring out how to optimize some of these smaller sites. You don't have to go as small as 1,000, but even just 2,000 square meters, try and go for those, even if they're less margin and less profit than a 3,000 or 4,000 square meter site. I think greed is gone in this market. I think you got to be smart because it's variable income. Now, if you are looking at a scenario, whether it's a live site that you're taking over or there's no members and it's abandoned and you're just doing it and you're just looking at it, I think the first key consideration is, will it work? And this is something that I always ask myself when I look at opportunities. So it's kind of letting you figure out how I would approach this. Because, just because you're looking at and taking over it, if the previous operator couldn't make it work, the first gut instinct you got to ask yourself is, if they couldn't make it work, why could I make it work, right? And I think compressing it or making it smaller in the first instance is a good way to approach it. If 4,000 didn't work back then, it's not going to work now, realistically. Obviously, do your market intelligence, do your due diligence, but if you're already looking at it from the lens of we'll take half of that space, I think that's the best way to approach it. But always ask yourself, and don't get, egotistical in this sense. There's, I can make it work because I'm a better operator. The reality is, if they couldn't, there's a chance that you won't be able to as well. The second one is fit out. Is there an opportunity for you to utilize that existing fit out, right? Because the reality is if you can, you're going to save a significant amount of dollars on your capital expenditure, right? And I'm not saying you have to use it the exact same stuff and it looks and feels the same, because you clearly will have your own brand that you want to put in there. But the expensive stuff, right? The partitions, the acoustic treatment of the offices and the rooms, is the back of house largely something that you can use? So if you end up tweaking it and making it nice and zhuzhing it up so that it's your brand, but you keep even like 60% of the back of house without tearing everything apart and having to build all of those walls, which is the most expensive part of a co-working fit out. I think that's something that you should really think about, because it could suddenly make that tired site that didn't work once upon a time, once you've kind of compressed it and now you're saving upfront capital costs in building it, depending on what kind of deal you do, you're suddenly front loading and reducing, the amount of money that you would normally put into the capex that you can then help float your operating costs when you're ramping up the first year. So really think about that. And then the third one, deal structure. It could go two ways. If you're going to go down the management agreement path, I think, without going down that rabbit hole, you really got to figure out how to take care of that owner as well to get the best deal possible. So in the compression strategy scenario, if you can really figure out how to help them lease some of those other floors, if it's a live operation, so you're taking over a co-working site that's still got members in it, it's being shut down, I think that would, put a big smile on their face. And we'll get into how you do that in the time-sensitive section below. But if not, and it's a straight lease or hybrid lease, and you want your incentive, so let's go the straight lease scenario. The second point I was going to, if you could figure out how to reuse a lot of that fit out, and the incentive in the Australian market, the AU market, as a tenant, you get a substantial incentive right now. It's 30 to 50%. It's ridiculous, I know. If suddenly you don't have to spend X million dollars up front on the fit out, or you only have to spend half of it, that's money in the bank to help your P&L as an operator, right? So look into the deal structure. And then the last one, I kind of touched on it, but how can you help the landlord? And I really think this is important because, if they've got a section of their building that's just been sitting empty with a co-working fit out in there, if you can help solve a problem for them, I really feel like it's how you will be perceived moving forward for the next deal with that particular landlord, whether it's small or large. Just food for thought, really think about it. Because I do think flex has a really important part of the office puzzle and future. And if you can start positioning yourself not just as a co-working operator re-renting desks, right, but someone who can help solve a problem and be malleable and flexible, pun intended, on how you work with that landlord, especially if you're peddling a management agreement, give them some, advantages of doing that. Because as a landlord, when they hear management agreement, when they look at it, rightfully so, because of the way that they're structured, it just looks like a lot of risk for not so much reward. What can you do to help them? So I think number 4 is really important. Now, if you are taking over a site, some really time-sensitive stuff, if it's live, so there's 2 scenarios where if it's live, right? If the co-working operator running the space is pretty much getting ready to leave in the middle of the night and everyone knows it, but no one knows it, how quickly can you keep the lights on and keep it running so that you can retain members? Or it could be a scenario where, that particular operator is being open and upfront with the landlord, don't want the site anymore, but they're happy for them to look at some form of, can you find someone to take over it, compress it, keep the members? The reality is it's not as simple as it sounds. The first thing from a time-sensitive perspective is tech and connectivity. And by that I mean, previous operator has all of these, their infrastructure set in, their internet, their network, the locks on the doors and everything, all of that stuff's going to get shut off, right? So what's your solution for the next day to have your stuff in there? All right, so that even if you do retain members, is it a scenario where there's day one, as soon as you kind of move over to management, they can still work there and be connected and access their offices and book meeting rooms and all that kind of stuff? Or as part of the communication, is it you guys don't have to move, this is still your home and address, but we're going to be dark for a month? How are you going to manage that? Or 2, it really depends on your provider and how you're going to look at that. So tech and connectivity is always overlooked in these scenarios because on paper it looks good to take over something, but the reality is it's going to take some time. So what's your communication strategy for anyone that you're trying to retain? Or even if you're not trying to retain members, the reality is what's your go live date, right? The second one is staff. Time sensitive. Do you have staff on standby to take over this site immediately or not? I actually think there's a really great opportunity to retain staff, meaning if it's a live site or if it's being handed over from that other operator that's giving it up, the on-site staff if they know the members, if they know the site, is there an opportunity to keep them on that site, especially if they're out of a job? You know, if that company's going to retain them, move them somewhere else, great, fair income, fine. But if they're just going to be booted, like the site, can you retain them if they go through your training and everything? I think that's something to really consider, because then they know the space, they know the people. There's a lot of onboarding that you can kind of even say from a cost perspective. I think you really got to consider that. That's what I do all the time. And member retention, we kind of touched on it. Super important from a time-sensitive angle. I worked on a few sites where, because the comms weren't lined up in terms of taking it over, both with operators that we were working well with and others that weren't, missed opportunity. We had to take over a site and open at 0% occupancy, right? Because we had to move quick, but all those members got moved in the middle of the night to another site, you know, another site and everything like that. Whereas in hindsight, even though some of these situations can get hairy, but it's an opportunity again, a bit of communication can go a long way. You know, whether you're allowed to or not, really depends. Sometimes you got to consult lawyers in this situation, because it might be the landlord that's having the conversation with the operator and not you directly with the operator, right? Sometimes I feel like it could be very cheeky and not something that I would do, because I represent JLL, but I could totally see smaller private operators just sending someone into the site, sitting down at an open desk and being like, hey, everyone, you probably got a message that this site is shutting down, but hang around, landlord's got a solution that they're going to put in to take over it. So if you don't want to get kicked out, just stay here. You know, that could go a long way, you know, and that's more of a message to anyone out there who's a small boutique operator considering taking over another small site, any part of the world. I think, you know, at the end of the day, just be transparent. If everyone's transparent in this situation, the members win. And isn't that the whole point of this? No, it's the dollars, right? Just kidding. But yeah, the members' experience should be retained. So hopefully that's helpful. Again, a bit of a niche situation. There's a link to a JLL video that I'll put in the description that kind of very loosely touches on our process of taking over sites that you're welcome to watch. And if you've got any further questions about this, because there's an opportunity for you in your neck of the woods, please feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to help guide you in this situation, because you got to do it right to maximize your upfront occupancy and therefore, you know, the revenue coming through the door, and then everyone's happy. Especially if you're under a management agreement in this situation, it's rev share, profit share, and the landlord's at risk as well. Everyone wants to win in this scenario. And if the operator leaving gets a better deal and more leniency from the landlord in their exit, again, everyone wins. So good luck to you, and I'll speak to you again soon.